Imagine it, a cold, rainy night in 1777. The kind of night where even the bravest soldiers pray to be indoors. The kind of night where the darkness feels heavier than usual, and the road ahead doesn't just look dangerous, it looks impossible. And somewhere in that storm, on a small horse galloping through mud and shadows, is not a soldier, not a grown man hardened by battle, but a 16-year-old girl. She's riding alone. She's riding fast. She's riding because the survival of hundreds of people depends on whether she can deliver one message in time. Her name was Sybil Ludington. And if Paul Revere earned a place in history books, then Sybil deserved 10 chapters. Welcome back to Legends Without Applause. Today we're going to talk about a young woman whose courage helped shape the future of a nation, yet whose name barely appears outside local statues or the occasional plaque. Sybil's story is the kind of story people often assume is a myth because it sounds too bold to be real. But sometimes history hides its brightest sparks in the quietest corners. And Sybil Ludington, the teenage writer who outdid Paul Revere himself, is one of those sparks. Let's start with who she was before that night. Sybil was born in 1761 in what is now Putnam County, New York. She was the eldest of 12 children, which already tells you something about her life. In a family that large, responsibility isn't optional. You grow up fast. You help raise the little ones. You learn to keep calm when things get chaotic. Her father, Colonel Henry Ludington, was a farmer, a mill owner, and a respected leader in the local militia. He wasn't just a military officer in title. He was the person the surrounding communities relied on to organize defense, gather intelligence, and protect them from loyalist raids. So Sybil didn't grow up sheltered from the political tension of the era. She grew up in a home that was part family, part command center. The Revolutionary War wasn't a distant rumor in their household. It was right there. Soldiers came and went. Plans were whispered late into the night. The family farm wasn't just a farm. It was a strategic location in a region that was constantly at risk. Sybil absorbed all of this. She listened. She learned. She watched her father take on responsibility that sometimes seemed far too heavy for one person. And she understood, probably at an age far younger than most of us ever did, that freedom wasn't just a slogan. It was a fight. By the spring of 1777, the war had reached a dangerous point for the colonies. British and Loyalist forces were moving swiftly through New York, burning towns and trying to crush the spirit of the rebellion. One of the most feared Loyalist commanders, a man named Colonel William Tryon, had launched an attack on Danbury, Connecticut. This place held warehouses full of crucial Continental Army supplies: ammunition, food, equipment, medical gear. If those supplies fell, the local militia would be crippled. The news of the attack reached the Ludington home late on April 26th. It was dark, it was stormy, and a rider arrived at the door, nearly collapsing with exhaustion. He warned Colonel Ludington that Danbury was under assault and the militia needed to gather immediately to defend the region. But here was the problem. The men who served under Colonel Ludington were farmers scattered across miles of countryside. They didn't have phones, they didn't have telegraphs, and many of them were already asleep. The messenger who brought the news was too exhausted to ride any farther, and Colonel Ludington, who needed to stay put to coordinate the entire operation, couldn't leave to warn his own men. Someone had to ride. Someone had to get on a horse, face the storm, and reach dozens of homes spread across rough terrain in the middle of the night. Someone had to yell through the darkness and pound on doors and shout to people who might not even believe the danger was real. Someone had to convince them to gear up and get to the colonel's farm before dawn. And that someone was Sybil. 16-year-old Sybil stepped forward. There was no dramatic music, no heroic speech, no grand announcement, just a young woman saying she could do it. She knew the roads, she knew the men, and she knew the stakes. Her father agreed, but not without fear. This wasn't a safe ride. It wasn't even a sane one. But time was running out. Sybil saddled her horse, Star, and disappeared into the storm. Now let's pause here and picture this the way it really was. No streetlights, no pavement, no friendly towns glowing on the horizon, just pitch-black woods, rough trails, and the constant threat of loyalist patrols, some of whom would have had no hesitation harming a young woman alone in the night. And Sybil wasn't just taking one straight path. She had to ride a loop nearly 40 miles long, twice the distance of Paul Revere's famous ride. Twice the distance, at half the age, and under far harsher conditions. She rode from farm to farm, shouting that the British were burning Danbury and that every man was needed immediately. Her voice carried through the rain and wind. She pounded on doors until someone woke up. She had no guarantee people would listen, but they did. They recognized her. They trusted her. Because the Ludington family had been at the heart of their community for years, and if Sybil was riding out there alone in that storm, they knew the danger was real. Every time she reached a door, she risked being spotted by patrols. Every time she rode another mile, she risked falling from exhaustion or her horse losing its footing. And she kept going. Imagine her soaking wet, shivering, pushing Star forward through muddy paths where even grown men struggled to ride. Imagine the fear she must have felt, and then think about the courage it took to keep riding anyway. By the time Sybil returned home hours later, she had warned almost every militia soldier in the region. Riders later estimated she covered about 40 miles that night. When the men assembled at the Ludington house that morning, they were ready because of her. And, though the militia was unable to save Danbury, they fought back fiercely against the British on their return march. Sybil's ride didn't stop the attack, but it ensured the militia wasn't caught unprepared. It allowed them to defend their towns, their families, and their land. Her effort helped turn scattered farmers into an organized response. Here's the part that stings a little. Sybil's ride, though extraordinary, didn't become a national story. Paul Revere got poems, he got paintings, he got a place in American mythology. Sybil got a few passing mentions in local history records. She wasn't forgotten entirely, but she was never given the recognition she deserved. And there are a few possible reasons for that. Some say it was because she was a young woman in a time when people didn't want to highlight women in military roles. Others say her ride simply didn't get as much publicity because it took place in a rural area where news traveled slowly. Whatever the reason, her bravery didn't receive the applause it deserved. After the war, Sybil didn't live a dramatic or widely public life. She married, raised children, and worked to support her family after her husband died young. She lived quietly, which honestly fits the theme of her life. She wasn't a person who chased attention. She stepped up when her community needed her, and she didn't ask for anything afterward. But the older I get, the more I appreciate people like Sybil. People who do something extraordinary not because they think it will make them famous, but because it needs to be done. People who walk into fear, not away from it. People who don't wait for someone older or stronger to take their place, but simply say, I can do this. That's true courage. And Sybil's ride is one of the clearest examples of it in American history. Let's go back to that night again for a moment. Think about what it meant to be 16 in 1777. Today, when we think about 16-year-olds, we think about school, getting a driver's license, maybe a part-time job. But in Sybil's world, 16 meant adulthood was already at the doorstep. Life expectancies were lower, responsibilities were higher, and families relied on every capable member to contribute. Still, riding through a storm to rally an entire militia? That wasn't expected of anyone. That was towering bravery. Riding through territory where loyalist forces were known to kidnap or attack rebels wasn't just dangerous. It was potentially fatal. Yet, she didn't hesitate. She wasn't trained as a soldier. She didn't have weapons or armor. She had grit, and she had a belief in something bigger than herself. The more you study her ride, the more impressive it gets. The roads were uneven and narrow, often just dirt paths through dense forest. The rain turned the ground to slipping mud. The dark made it impossible to see anything more than a few feet ahead. It wasn't just one challenge. It was a wall of them. But Sybil kept moving. Some accounts say she used a stick to bang on doors because it was faster than dismounting. Imagine doing that in the middle of the night with the wind howling around you, without the certainty that the people inside would even hear you. Every second counted. She didn't slow down. She didn't turn back. And when you think about role models, when you think about the kind of courage that deserves to be taught in schools, Sybil Ludington belongs right there at the top. What I love about this story is that it breaks every expectation people have about heroes in the Revolutionary era. We often picture men in uniform, muskets over their shoulders, marching into battle. But the truth is, the revolution was held together by moments like Sybil's. Moments where ordinary people stepped into extraordinary roles because survival depended on it. Moments where teenagers showed as much courage as seasoned soldiers. Moments where women played crucial roles even though history rarely bothered to record their names. Think about the message that sends. Heroism doesn't always look like a battlefield. Sometimes it looks like someone pushing their fears aside in the middle of the night and choosing to act when others can't. Sometimes it looks like a 16-year-old girl riding through storm and danger to protect her community. Sybil's ride also says something powerful about leadership. People followed her warning because they trusted her family, but also because they trusted her. She wasn't a random messenger. She was someone who had grown up in that community, someone they knew wouldn't risk her life unless the threat was real. Her voice carried weight because she had earned it through years of being reliable, responsible, and involved. And when you look at the bigger picture, her ride didn't just rally a militia. It became a symbol of what the revolution truly was, a fight carried by ordinary people whose names didn't make the front pages. The war wasn't won by generals alone. It was won by farmers, teenagers, families, mothers, daughters, fathers, and sons who believed that a free nation was worth the sacrifice. As the years passed, Sybil's name faded behind louder tales. But eventually, people began rediscovering her story. Statues were built in her honor. Books were written. Her ride became part of local lore in New York and Connecticut. And even though she's still not as widely known as Revere or other revolutionary figures, her story is slowly reclaiming its place in history. But here's the thing. Even if the entire world suddenly learned her name, the courage she showed that night isn't valuable because of fame. It's valuable because it reminds us that anyone, no matter their age, gender, or circumstances, can step into a moment and shape the course of history. That's what makes Sybil a perfect fit for Legends Without Applause. She didn't ride for praise. She didn't ride for recognition. She rode because lives were in danger and someone had to do something. And honestly, if you look closely at many of the moments that changed history, that's the pattern you'll find. Big events held together by quiet people making huge choices. People who act because something inside them won't let them stand still. Sybil Ludington may never become a household name on the level of the giants of the American Revolution, but that doesn't make her contribution any smaller. If anything, it makes it more inspiring. She stepped into darkness not knowing whether she'd make it back. She acted without ceremony, without expectation of reward, and without anyone telling her she had to. And that, to me, is the kind of hero worth celebrating today. So the next time you hear about Paul Revere's ride, remember that there was a young woman who rode even farther, in worse conditions, at a younger age, and with just as much determination. A rider who deserves to stand right beside the great names of the era. A rider who gave everything she had in one night to protect her home and her people. This is what Legends Without Applause is all about. Not the stories everyone already knows, not the heroes who stand on every monument, but the people history tucked away in footnotes or left out entirely. People like Sybil Ludington, whose courage deserves a spotlight even centuries later. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about the figures who shaped history from the shadows, make sure to join me for the next episode. There's a whole world of unsung heroes waiting for us to bring their stories back into the light.